Today I thought I'd do a video I'd have planned for a while, which I believe will be the last video of the year. I hope to be getting more videos done next year. I call this video All Stabilo All. After investing in getting all of the different Stabilo All pencils available, I decided to prove what their limits are. I think they're brilliant, beautiful, fun to use pencils that can write on all kinds of surfaces and are very water soluble. The black is my absolute favorite, but all of them are quite useful. You can also palette and mix them just by scribbling them onto a palette, and after letting layers dry, you can go back over top. I'm planning on primarily using them for various mixed media. The pencil's water soluble but still erasable. Here's an example of me testing them all out. Now, I decided to push it to the limit, take my time. This video is filmed over time, letting certain layers dry between. I also practiced and did research and worked out what I was going to do before actually doing the final artwork in my sketchbook here. I also did a little bit more practice testing out the Stabilo Alls by themselves. I've been using them as part of other mixed media as I said, but let's see what can be done with just Stabilo All. I decided I wanted to do a very muscular black elven man by taking advantage of the tone tan paper to use it as a color base. These colors are actually fairly opaque and vibrant, and the white can show up, especially if you layer it on such paper. So for contrast, I designed him to have very bright white dreadlocks. As I said, I looked up reference and did research and drew out a sketch. I was looking at my other sketch in order to use it as a base before drawing this out here. I'm using erasers, pencils, and at this stage, just the Stabilo All pencil. The only pencil I used for this was the Stabilo All version, which is water soluble, but I'm using it mostly as a traditional pencil here. I also use various paint brushes once I get to the section where I will be using the colored Stabilo All pencils to color this in. You can mix the colors together to make your own colors. Even with a limited color palette, you can do a lot if you know what you're doing for color mixing. With such a limited color range, I truly wish there was more colors available. I really wish for one color more than any others, a slightly magenta-leaning, vibrant purple. I cannot mix a proper magenta or purple with the limited color range available, and it's really a color I'm finding I miss and keep wanting to use in my art. I wish there was several more colors available in Stabilo All, including a nice, already mid-tone gray, a couple shades of purple, more of a violet purple, more of a reddish purple. I really wish there was a few more shades of brown, and a lot of different colors would be nice. It has a very limited color range, but it's a really enjoyable medium to work with, and as I said, it can actually write on all different surfaces. It's really quite brilliant on paper. Because it can write on top of other things, it can actually be used as a top layer on top of pretty much any mixed media it can write on top of, which is very rare. And as I said, it can be used like a watercolor pencil. This is what I'm doing here. I'm going to wet all these layers of color you're seeing me place down using a soft makeup brush. I very much advise you get some makeup brushes from the dollar store and use them for watercolor and mixed media painting because they're absolutely amazing. I advise you get more that you use with acrylic paint and for miniature painting. As you can see, I'm putting white down. The Stabilo All white is actually fairly opaque. It's not as good as I wish it was, but it's still quite good, and you can actually do a lot. Now, it fades out quite a bit if you rinse it down, but that allows you to mix it in to make milkier and more gouache colors to a slight extent. And once it completely dries, you can layer on top. As I said, if you let layers completely dry, you can keep layering on top. I'm planning it out so I can intentionally smudge it. I'm making sure to rinse and wipe off my paintbrush so that color transfer doesn't happen in an inappropriate way. Here's me coming back after it's fully dried to put on another layer. As you can see, when it fully dries, it sets in more, but it actually is capable of being quite the versatile medium. I decided to do this muscular black elven man. I was being intentionally opposite to what the standards are. The standard is a lithe, slender elf that's very feminine, or female itself, really pale with black hair or dark hair or blonde hair. So I thought white dreadlocks as contrast with very dark skin would be an interesting take on things. I'm not seeing enough of that. I'm not seeing enough, you know, muscular black elven men, and not necessarily drow, but just black elf. Like, why not? So I decided to do it because I was seeing a lack when I looked up elf reference. I was seeing a lack of this type of reference. I wanted to take advantage of how deep and rich and very black the Stabilo All black pencil is, so I knew I wanted the design to include raven motifs and a lot of black in the clothing. So I looked up goth clothing that involved ravens and raven feathers and the whole idea of crows and ravens to help me design this. In the end, some of the reference I looked up made me want to show more of the skin. And so I designed this sort of elven barbarian character. I might actually make a stat block and use this character in the D&D campaign I'm currently DMing because he could be a powerful barbarian, why not? And I just think that I wanted him to be beautiful and pleasant and happy. Like, he's very, like, happy with his own physical appearance. I just thought it would be fun. I just thought there was too many unhappy, frowning, pouty-faced, emo goth elves that were pale-skinned, so I made him a goth elf who was, however, dark-skinned and muscular and happy about it rather than sad about it. Because, I mean, you don't have to dress in goth style and be upset all the time. You can actually be happy and dress in cool goth style. I did also want him to be attractive. I was keeping that theme, that elves are beautiful. So I was definitely keeping the attractive, beautiful quality. The other thing is I went through some trouble to design the hair. When I did the original rough sketches, I did some digitally and I traced over to do one pencil copy I was looking at off screen. I designed several different ways the hair flow, and I wanted to make sure that overall the composition of the pose and the hair looked good together. And as you can see, I'm actually adding some shading even on top of the white with a brown pencil, and I'm using blue and brown layered for the highlights where it will be otherwise very dark black. And I put those in first because I can't really get it back to the tan color of the paper entirely, and I'm putting in watered down black on the edges. Then I'm going to go in and do the dark blacks. I still have detailing in the eyes here. So when you're working with things like this, water-soluble pencils of any variety, you really got to think about how you're going to layer it, and you got to plan for drying time. You have to let things completely dry before putting the next layer. You can speed this up by using a hairdryer. I didn't in this case. I was painting two things at once, and once I got too much layered up, I'd switch to the other painting. I then edited this video together so it looks like the video of each of the two different paintings happened in a row rather than splitting it apart the way I actually had to. Look how rich and black and beautiful the Stabilo All black pencil is once you wet it. This makeup brush is soft, wonderful, but also fairly stiff bristled in a way, very springy. It's very, very good for wetting water-soluble pencils, and it's also very good for watercolor painting, especially if you want smooth blends and gradients. I find it extremely helpful. I had to push a little hard and go through some trouble to get the highlights in here. There's a sticky sort of quality to these pencils, but I actually really enjoy them. And as I said, they're actually really good for mixed media. They don't have to be used alone. This is just showing what you can do with just such a limited range of Stabilo All pencils. But it's really fun. And I think that they're particularly good if you're going to use them with other media. You don't have to use them alone. I'm just doing that here to see what the limits are for what I can do with just Stabilo All. Working on this, I made sure to think about how I could take advantage of the colors I had and not get caught up in the fact that I couldn't do certain things with purples. Although while I was doing the rough copies for this, I just kept thinking of ideas that would involve purple because, of course I wanted to do what I couldn't do. Anyway, I'm doing a lot of touch-ups here, cleaning up the edges, and here's one last final look. I still have to decide what to name him. At this stage, I switch over to my other book. I didn't quite catch the footage correctly of putting down those swatches. There was a problem. So I continued here with some additional footage showing the paletting and mixing process. You can scribble down on this tearaway palette surface, and you can add different amounts of colors next to each other and mix them up with a wet paintbrush. You can also water it down further to get very, very pale shades, or use less water to get slightly darker shades. You have to scribble down a lot if you want a large amount of color, but you can use a mix of what is paletted and what is done directly on the page. And you can also work in layers. Like before, in the previous painting, you saw me work in layers by letting things completely dry and then going over top. I find it works well on a lot of different papers. I haven't found a paper I have any real problems with, but different papers have different qualities. I find I'm doing constant paper tests on every different paper I own in order to best use different paper to its own full advantage. In a mixture of stubbornness and cheapness and not having a lot of money in the first place, I've developed many techniques to use even the cheapest of papers with materials that aren't intended for them. So I use thin, like this paper here, sketchbook pages with watercolor and water-soluble materials because I insist I can, and I find a technique and a way of using those materials that takes advantage of the paper or uses it to its fullest potential. Even if it's difficult, I do extra training and trouble and practice so I can figure out how to use whatever paper I want with whatever material I want. Even though sometimes you cannot do certain effects or ways of painting on really cheap paper. This paper is very thin, and so I can't do super wet and wet washes over a very large area and get colors to bleed and be incredibly vibrant the way it would look on, say, a high quality watercolor paper. But by using makeup brushes, which are very soft yet springy, and by using larger brushes than you necessarily think, and then going in for fine details, by working in proper layers and using the correct pressure, and by paletting on another surface and bringing things back in, you can actually do a lot even on the cheapest of papers. So if someone says you simply cannot paint on really thin paper with watercolor, it's actually not true. It's just a lot harder. You might get frustrated or be unable to do certain techniques or certain things easily or at all, but you can certainly find a way. I keep finding a way. Part of the reason why I've been using a lot of gouache is because I find gouache works exceptionally well on every paper, though it does work differently on each paper. I'm doing a lot of different mixed media and working out how I can best use things and how I can best work on different papers. As I said, don't believe you can't do it at all, just figure out how. However, it is an awful lot of work and trouble to use paper that is not ideal still properly. As you could see, I mixed a lot of different colors together to get a paler skin tone. It takes a lot of different colors to get a proper paler skin tone. The other interesting thing is this is actually going to dry a bit lighter if you leave it alone to dry. And you need to be prepared for things to look a little different, wet and dry. When you lay down the dry pencil, it looks very different than if you go over it with water, which will also look a bit different from when it's wet to when it's dry. So there's a certain amount of color shifting you need to keep in mind, and I find it looks softer and creamier and spread out. If you use a soft brush and a decent amount of water and a makeup brush, you can do that. I'm also using a fine little brush here, very pointed round tip, to get the color directly off the pencil for very fine, bright details. So I don't only have to go directly on the paper or on the palette, you can even pick up some paint with a paintbrush from the pencil tip. Be careful not to get the wood wet, so don't dip the pencil in the water. That can damage the actual way the pencil is held together, so just be careful for that. Other than that, you can do a lot of different techniques. I didn't go through too much trouble to plan out what I was going to do with these flowers, but of course, once again, I kept wanting purple, but I didn't have purple, so I tried to mix up a bit of a purple tone here by mixing the blue and the red. But as you know, more of a bright orangey red mixed with a blue that's not very cyan does not work well to get a proper purple. It's a slight purplish hint, but it's not proper. You need magenta and you need actual vibrant purple to get that. So the other thing is, working up on layers, you can get things more vibrant over time. And because you can use water to wash things out with these pencils, you can get highlights to be presumed by not putting any color there and by pulling from the darkest color towards where you want to leave more of a highlight and then lifting the paintbrush up to the white of the paper. So you can go by intentionally not touching a spot, you can leave it white. By pulling up your brush before it makes it there, or by putting more water and gently pulling towards where you want to leave the highlight and then picking the brush up. I add in the fine details, and here's one last look at my little elf lady I did on the white paper. Once again, that's all for this video. If you like my videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell to all notifications so you will know when a new video comes up. I aim for new videos every Wednesday, but sometimes life happens and things are delayed. I hope that you enjoyed this video and will see you with another one very soon.